Hello my friends! Today we are going to paint together this floral bouquet. This is a flower composition with the 3 main hero flowers and many other fill-in flowers. We are going to use our usual supplies. We are going to just add a different touch using a little bit of pink ink. So are you ready to start painting with me? My name is Luisa and this is the Lulu Blue Studio. So I took inspiration for this floral bouquet from a picture I found on Pinterest, and I've decided to give it a different kick, let's say, using a little bit of ink, which is a pink ink that I'm mixing with my usual watercolor paints. I'm starting from the first flower, one of the 3 hero flowers of this floral bouquet, and I'm mixing mainly a little bit of this pink ink. This is the color 337 from Ecoline, and I am using also a little bit of quinacridone magenta and yellow ochre. I'm creating the very first layer, so it's pretty light, and I'm adding a little bit of more concentrated pink ink and quinacridone magenta when the first layer is still wet, so through the wet on wet technique. I'm using a filbert brush because I think it's quite easy to achieve this shape of flowers with this sort of brush. And in this moment I'm mixing a little bit of quinacridone magenta with a little bit of red and quinacridone purple to create the second main flower of this flower composition. The reason why I've decided to add to these flowers a little bit of pink ink is because I want to give to these main flowers a little bit of more brightness compared to the usual flower compositions I've created so far. So inks are much brighter compared to usual watercolors and can be used even in just a little amount to really give a completely different effect to your flowers. So this is what I am doing. I'm mixing in this moment a little bit of ink, pink, with quinacridone purple, and as you can see through the wet on wet technique, really this touch of brightness really allows some of the petals to pop. To create these flowers, I'm mainly using the belly of the brush and the side of the brush. I like to use the wet on wet technique to allow these different colors to sort of blend all together at this stage while I'm creating the first layer. Using a similar approach and the same technique, I'm creating the third main flower of this composition that is facing the upper left corner of the page, and I'm using still a very light color value of pink to create this first layer. I'm using the sides especially of this brush to create these many petals of this first flower, and then I'm using this pink ink mixed with a little bit of yellow ochre to create this soft pink that blends into the wet first layer of paint. The idea for this composition that I have in head is to create these 3 main flowers that are popping from the page. So I wanted to use for these 3 main flowers this bright pink to allow them to really be the hero of this composition. And then I wanted to create many sort of fill-in flowers all over the bouquet, but these fill-in flowers are not as defined as the main flowers. So they are going to be really fill-in flowers that are going to frame the big peonies that I've just created. And in order to keep this composition simple, I'm using the same brush, this filbert brush, to create also all of these fill-in flowers. And I'm imagining the center of these flowers, so I'm creating all the petals around the center that at the moment is white, and I will fill in a second moment. I'm still using a warm color palette, so I'm mainly using red colors and yellow colors to create these filling flowers. And using the wet on wet technique, I remember to add a few touches that are going to blend and are going to create some areas with some darker and more bright spots. And then looking at the reference picture, I noticed that there are some darker flowers, and therefore I decided to use some quinacridone purple mixed with the cobalt violet to create this mixture that really helps the eyes of the observer to notice that there are some darker flowers. Remember, when you are creating many filling flowers like I'm doing in this moment, to change the color value of what you have on your brush. In this way, changing the color value, you will be able to create a sort of different levels of color. And so some flowers, in this case filling flowers, are going to pop more than others, giving the impressions that some flowers are going to be in the forefront and some other flowers are going to be in the background. I also added some yellow filling flowers because I want the color palette of this whole composition to be a little bit more light. Now I take a round brush in size 6, this is a silver black velvet brush, and I use the fine tip to start to create the stems of these flowers. I'd like to add at this point that if you are a beginner and you'd really like to understand and learn how to paint loose style flowers in watercolor, you can download my free ebook, which is an 18-page guide where I explain how to paint loose style flowers, but also which supplies to have and which techniques you can use to achieve the best results. You will find the link in the description below, and downloading this free ebook, you will also subscribe to my newsletter. Back to our painting. With this round brush, I am creating small leaves, and I've filled in first place the white spaces between all of the flowers, and I'm creating the very small first layer of leaves with a very light color value. I am mixing mainly some green earth and some sap green, and I am adding some darker green pigment through the wet on wet technique. At this stage of the watercolor process, don't be too afraid with the details of the leaves, for example, or where to put leaves. Where you find some white areas that you think should be filled in, because you want, for example, your composition to be more clustered, just add a very light layer of green, and then we can build on layers as soon as the first layer of paint is going to be completely dry. At this point, I'm using a flat brush, and I use still mixture of greens to create additional leaves. I am using at this point a flat brush just because I want my leaves to have a different shapes compared to the leaves I achieved using the round brush, but I still use very light values of green because I'm building just the first layer. I start to use some darker green, this is cobalt green dark, to add just with the side of my brush some strokes that are darker in color. Some strokes really blend with the first layer that is still wet, while other strokes of cobalt green dark just stay more defined on the page because there is no wet area they are laid on. And then I go back to my round brush in size 6 and I create a dark and muted green that is a mixture of cobalt green dark and quinacridone purple, to add a few details that are much darker and muted in color. I use this round brush because its tip is very thin, and therefore I can create these green touches, green brush strokes that are very fine but intense in color. So one of the tips that I want to give you is to remember, when you are creating flower composition, to have both flowers and leaves in different sizes. So remember to create leaves and flowers not only in different shapes but also in different sizes, because this will allow you to have quite a movement in your floral composition and not to have a very heavy, let's say, flower composition with always the same shapes, colors and sizes. And at this point, since our first layer is laid onto paper and is completely dry, we can start to build layers. And I love building layers with this round brush from the Silver Black Velvet brand, because this brush is very soft and holds a lot of water. Therefore, I find it perfect to use for this task. I like to use this pink ink and mix it with a little bit of scarlet red and quinacridone purple to create a second layer also on this first peony I'm working on. And then while this layer I just added is still wet, I added a little bit of red through the wet on wet technique. On the second flower, I'm adding a little bit of cobalt violet in the center to start create the layers also here. And I mix a little bit of ink, pink ink, to give that brightness that all the other colors I'm using are not able to give. Just a little bit of ink will go a long way, therefore just use a little bit of pink ink or any other color if you want to give this touch of brightness on your florals. At this point, through the wet on wet technique, I'm adding on the second layer I've just created some cobalt violet with the tip and the belly of this round brush. You can really see how these two flowers are popping at the moment from the whole composition due to the layering technique. And we come back to the third flower, and using a little bit of ink and a mixture of scarlet red and quinacridone magenta, I'm adding layers to this third peony. You can probably notice from this video how soft this tip of this brush is and how easy it is to lay layers on the paper using this brush. I've added more layers on the left part of this peony because I want the upper part of the peony to be sort of hidden from other flowers. Therefore, the upper part of the peony has less layers. Using the same brush and just a little bit of Mars Black, I'm adding the center to the flowers, and this will allow these filling flowers to really pop from the whole composition. You can add the center of these flowers in any color, but I picked black because I really wanted these small flowers to pop, just with a tiny touch of black. And now, using the same brush, I am adding a few layers on these small filling flowers. I'm not adding too many layers, and also these layers are not going to be too saturated and concentrated because I want these filling flowers to be noticeable, but I want the eyes of the observer to be dragged by the three main big flowers. And at this point, I'm mixing a little bit of quinacridone purple with azomating green yellow to create a dark green and to create a few brush strokes that really frame this whole composition. I always like to have a few brush strokes of greenery that are much darker and really help to frame and to give a sort of character to the flower compositions. As I'm looking at the whole composition, I notice that it's a little bit dark for my liking, and therefore I'm using this small round brush and a little bit of lemon yellow to add a little bit of bright yellow into the composition. I am adding these small brush strokes next to the black centers of the filling flowers. And looking at the whole composition, I've then decided also to add a few yellow brush strokes that are sort of other smaller filling flowers all around this main bouquet to frame and to highlight all of the flowers. Remember that in watercolor, even just a few brush strokes can really go a long way and can really help you with your composition. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, my friends. If so, please subscribe. And I just want to remind you that there is the free ebook for you to download if you want to learn how to paint loose style flowers. I hope to see you on my next video.